And the football team has a bye week, and I kind of said the same thing at the first bye week. This is probably a much needed bye week as far as timing is concerned, and it's an opportunity, I think, for players to do one of two things: either to check out or to rally together. And whatever that looks like, Kirk has been a very good head football coach as it relates to rallying the troops at times when it looks like things could fall apart. And the only difference here, and you and I have talked about this, is what you're playing for. It's been very rare that we've seen an Iowa team kind of play their way out of competition or play their way out of hopes of a title of some sort, whether it be just a division title or a Big Ten title or even making it to the national championship game, playoff, etc. So this is a bit of unprecedented territory. I wouldn't bet against Kirk Ferentz as it relates to being able to do that. But this has been a conversation here ever since the loss to UCLA Friday night, which once again, just ridiculous. I mean, you and I have not talked about that game, but just, I can say unacceptable and people will, you can't say that. It's unacceptable. You can't lose a 10-0 lead to an average at best UCLA team, and they're playing better right now. But you cannot lose that game. There have been too many of those this year, Mark. That's 3 times now we've come on this show and said, you cannot lose that game. You cannot lose. You blow a 13-point lead at home to Iowa State. You cannot blow a 10-0 road lead to an average, at best, UCLA team. And you cannot lose at Michigan State, a team that may not make a bowl. You can't do that. Not if you're going to be a good team. This is not a good team right now. They're way too up and down. It's a roller coaster of a year. And I sure didn't expect that. I don't think anybody expected it. Now, Vegas had Iowa's win total at, I believe, 7.5. I would still think they're going to hit the over on that. But hey, I'm not going to try to act like it's impossible that they could lose another one or 2 more. Can you imagine them limping to 6-6? I don't think that will happen. But I'm not afraid to go on the air and say it's a failure of a season. Now, that sounds rather harsh, and I don't relish the opportunity to say that. I feel bad for the players who have worked hard. That's not to say the leadership of this team is rotten or bad. Sometimes things just happen, and I even asked Coach Patterson, one of the, I think, more intriguing responses that I got from Coach Patterson. It was pretty simple, actually. But I asked him after the game, I said, Don, why doesn't this team play better on the road? Because it's like the defense even, you look at the defense, they've laid 2 gigantic eggs at UCLA and at Michigan State. And this is a defense that brought back so many guys. We called them loaded. And it's not just about that secondary corner position. I don't think Deshaun Lee played all that bad Friday night. I didn't really notice him all that much. But that's other aspects of the game. It's the front 4 against the defense against UCLA. The worst rush offense in the conference. And they run up and down the field on you. So why does this team not play better on the road? And I asked Coach Patterson, I said, when you had teams that struggled on the road, what was the common denominator? And he kind of just said, it's hard to really be able to identify that. I mean, certainly you're not within the program, you're not in the locker room. It's almost impossible. But, I asked him, maybe is it leadership? But see, that's such a hard one for me to wrap my mind around because the perception has long been with this team that they are really strong in the leadership room. And it starts with Jay Higgins on defense and Sebastian Castro and Y.A. Black. I mean, Jeremiah Pittman, some of the guys that don't even play that much, how strong the leadership is. So it's just, I can't possibly assume that that's the problem. I guess sometimes the chips just fall where they are, but it's a little odd. I mean, it's odd how they've lost these games on the road and blown leads. That's just not Iowa. And, boy, it's an uncertain future at this point. I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but it's a lot of uncertainties. Tim Lester talked today at his press conference about needing to go to the portal, and they're going to hit the portal hard, sure. But so is everybody else. You love hearing that, right? But Mark, if I told you as a head football coach, and you're interviewing me on your show, trying to hype up the fan base, and I told you, Mark, I have a message to the fans. We are going to hit the recruiting cycle in the high schools hard during this next offseason. Okay. Who cares? That's part of your job. The portal is part of your job. It's part of recruiting now. This should not be like some optional thing. Dabo Sweeney's kind of learned that, I think, to some extent. You can't just say we're not going to utilize it or we don't need to. And frankly, the argument could be made now that they didn't hit it hard enough last offseason. And at the time, I didn't really hop on that train because they brought so many extra guys back. So it's hard. It's hard to, but it's also hard to imagine that you would rather a portal guy than bringing back an extra year for Higgins and for Castro and for Black and these guys. So a lot to unravel there. It's just incredibly deflating, and yeah, you can point a lot of different places.
I took a lot of interest in this game on Friday night, I think for a number of reasons, because I am fascinated by the West Coast teams entering the Big Ten. And so those games in particular. Number two, I spend my entire Saturday just trying to soak up as much I can from various games. And so I'm just going constantly, just watching, recording. And I knew I wasn't going to do anything concerning the game. And I like when there are just one or two games on Friday, and I just sat and watched the game and enjoyed the game and took note of a lot of things that we discussed about strengths and weaknesses and about matchups. And I knew that TJ Harden was a really good back. I didn't know exactly what his story was this year, besides being nicked up a little bit. The offensive line has apparently not played well, but yeah, to see an Iowa defense struggle against the run against a UCLA team that was, I believe, last in the conference in rushing. Yep. And then the flip side was Caleb Johnson, of course, coming in where really no one has shut him down. Off the top of my head, Ohio State would be the most, the team that controlled him the most. And for UCLA, just to, I don't know what his final numbers were, but it didn't appear as though he did much of anything in that game. I just continually remember seeing them stop him, wrap him up but they came in with an excellent rush defense that's somewhere around 6th or 7th in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They've played a tough schedule.
Mark, I talked about that in lead up. I don't know if you and I discussed it, but I talked about it on my preview that this was the opposite of the Wisconsin game. And I had a preview out, and wasn't just clickbait. And that came to fruition because I made the comment in my title for the UCLA game. I didn't predict UCLA was going to win, but I did put in my title. I said, this could be, the Rose Bowl could remain a house of horrors for Iowa this weekend because the numbers were exactly the opposite of Wisconsin. Wisconsin's weakness on defense was Iowa's strength, and Iowa's strength on defense was Wisconsin's strength. So that's going to cancel each other out, and then you're going to have so that's exactly the opposite of what happened here. UCLA's strength was passing. That's kind of been Iowa's weakness defensively. UCLA's strength defensively is stopping the run. That has been what Iowa's relied on. So what we saw was really that and more, right? Because we did not expect Iowa's defense to give up the number of rushing yards for Harden. And, he hasn't had a 1,000-yard season. This is year 3. And that rush offense has been not even close. Like, they are not only worst in the conference, they're not even close to being second worst in the front conference. They're worse by a mile, a country mile. So, yeah, it's hard to explain. He sure looked good on Saturday. And there's the conspiracy theorists that Iowa doesn't play well on grass. I can't.
I heard your discussion.
I don't get that. So, if that's the case, then that's even more disturbing. Like, what are we doing here? You can't play on grass. Last I checked, that's where football has long been played. Okay, just because you have an artificial turf field, and there's a lot of turf fields out there, then go play on some grass and figure that out. I don't think that's a problem. And Kirk downplayed that as well when he was asked. They've been really good at Iowa State since like 2011. They haven't lost there in over a decade. And that's a grass field, and they shut Iowa State down more often than not. So, and there've been some pretty skilled offensive teams for Iowa State, the likes of Breece Hall and David Montgomery, and so I don't buy that. Now there has been a game or two. I think about 2017 at Iowa State, it was 44-41. So you could argue the defense struggled that day if you want to attribute it to grass. But what about 2023 and 2021 and 2019? Those games weren't high scoring, and Iowa, won those games the way you would expect Iowa to win any game on any surface.
Yeah. So the other aspect that was fascinating to me, and I'm trying to go back to last Friday night. I didn't take notes or anything, but that just the way these teams are perceived, and sometimes we hang on to stereotypes a little bit. And the Iowa stereotype is that, of course, they're going to play a fundamentally better game than their opponent most of the time.
That's not
They're
real
going,
quick though. That I just want to interrupt.
yeah,
That's not a stereotype though, because the numbers heading into this game, Iowa was like the least. I have the numbers right here. Iowa was substantially better than UCLA at protecting the ball and forcing turnovers. Iowa was substantially better on third down, doing the small things. Penalties, they were the least penalized team in the. Excuse me, they were the third least penalized team in the conference. UCLA was dead last in penalty yardage per game. Over 70 yards of penalties per game for UCLA. Iowa was just third. So
and I think UCLA had more penalty yards in this game. I think they
probably,
racked up quite a bit.
yeah. But I'm just saying the discipline aspect of what you're saying, isn't it? That's real. They just went against the grain on Friday.
Yeah. And then what I was getting to was that UCLA looked really good in the first half, but they kept shooting themselves in the foot. And I do my best to try to be a balanced approach on, okay, UCLA drives the ball down to the 1 yard line. Well, Iowa does what Iowa does. They take the ball away. They took it away on a strip from behind on Ethan Garbers, who was headed to the end zone. And then, of course, they had a really good play at the line where they read his eyes. They deflected the ball in the air and they pick it off. So excellent play by Iowa to end a drive. But of course, UCLA did a lot of work and showed a lot of dominance at the line of scrimmage, or I'll taper that back to control at the line of scrimmage to drive the ball all the way down the field. So then the conventional wisdom is, well, UCLA is going to be deflated because they're gonna be deflated, and they had their chances. They're not going to be able to do anything else. Iowa's weathered the storm. They'll figure it out. They'll figure out how the ball's being moved on them so easily. And they turned back UCLA. They got a 10-0 lead. This game's over. But UCLA kept coming, and then of course you had the injury to Brendan Sullivan.
And 414 total yards for UCLA, and it very much lines up with Michigan State in that game, how that game was played in a sense. So you mentioned the red zone turnovers, and let me correct that, goal line, end zone turnovers. These were not just red zone turnovers. These were right at the goal line. And similar to Michigan State, and remember that first half, Mark? It was 12-0. Iowa held them every single time to a field goal, but they still got down there and scored field goals. So the bending, Iowa's bending too much, and they're breaking too much. But they're bending way too much. That's all there is to it. I mean, they're not stopping the run well enough, although they do. That's a weird thing. They do one week and then they don't the next. So, I mean, if you had picked either Wisconsin or UCLA to go off on Iowa on the ground, which one would you pick? This year or any year? You'd pick Wisconsin every time. But those two games couldn't have been more opposite as it relates to expectations and results.
So I can't think of his name, but the four-string quarterback that was playing
Jackson
scout team linebacker.
Stratton. Yeah, Jackson.
Played pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you go back and revisit my video, the Iowa quarterback that no one is talking about from the offseason?
That's one of the infamous specials.
Yeah,
right
it
there.
is. Yeah. So I was happy for Jackson. I think the whole he was playing scout team linebacker maybe played up a little bit. He was doing that, but he's a quarterback, right? Let's just make that he is a quarterback, came here to play quarterback. He's a walk-on, former Washington commit, played at Colorado State, was on scholarship. I thought he came in, and I don't know what you thought. I thought he came in and held his own.
Sure.
Made a couple of nice throws on third down.
Yeah.
And led Iowa to a touchdown and kind of got them back in it. And you're thinking, okay, man, you're tied up here. Let's just hold them and get this ball back. And Drew Stevens, heck, he made a 57-yarder that got taken off because Iowa accepted a penalty. I mean, we all know Drew Stevens is a phenomenal kicker. If Iowa had gotten the ball back, it was different circumstances. I know they didn't move the ball at all once they got it back down by 3. It was 2017, but had it been 17-17, especially if they could have flipped the field, I think they would have gotten in field goal range and he would have won the game and it would have been 2017 Iowa, but that's not what happened. The defense again allowed a long drive. Just crazy, crazy stuff.